The story of Saul is a story of great promise and tragic downfall. Saul stood tall, a head above other men. God chose him, a humble man from the tribe of Benjamin, to be the first king of Israel.
He was anointed by the prophet Samuel, a symbol of God's blessing and favor upon his life.
Saul's early reign was marked by victory. He led the Israelites against their enemies, securing their borders and establishing a sense of peace and security. God was with him, empowering him to conquer mighty foes.
Saul's heart was right with God in those early days. He was humble, recognizing that his strength and success came from the Lord.
The people rejoiced in their new king, grateful for his leadership and the peace he brought to the land.
But as time went on, a change began to take root in Saul's heart, a change that would have devastating consequences for him and for the nation of Israel. The Amalekites were a fierce and ruthless nomadic tribe. They were enemies of God's people, having attacked them without provocation during their exodus from Egypt. God had not forgotten their cruelty. Generations had passed since that first encounter, but the memory of Amalekite brutality lingered in the hearts of the Israelites. God, in his perfect justice and righteousness, declared that the Amalekites would be held accountable for their actions. The time had come for judgment to fall upon the Amalekites. God chose Saul to be the instrument of his wrath, to carry out his righteous decree and wipe out the Amalekites from the face of the earth. Through the prophet Samuel, God delivered a clear and unambiguous command to Saul: utterly destroy the Amalekites, leaving no survivors and taking no plunder. This was not a suggestion, but a direct order from the King of Kings.
Go, Samuel instructed. Attack the Amalekites. Destroy everything that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys.
Saul gathered his army, a force of 210,000 men, and set out to confront the Amalekites. The Israelites, empowered by God and led by their king, were confident in their ability to vanquish their enemies.
The battle was fierce, but the Israelites, strengthened by the Lord, prevailed. They routed the Amalekite army, scattering their forces and pursuing them relentlessly.
Saul had within his grasp the victory that God had promised. Yet, as the dust settled on the battlefield, a shadow of disobedience began to fall upon Saul's triumph. He had won the battle, but he would soon lose something far more precious: his relationship with God. Saul, blinded by pride and swayed by the whispers of his own desires, chose to disobey God's clear command. He spared Agag, the king of the Amalekites, taking him prisoner instead of putting him to death.
Not only did Saul spare Agag, but he also allowed his soldiers to keep some of the plunder, the best of the sheep, cattle, and other valuables.
They justified their actions, arguing that they were merely taking spoils of war, a common practice in those days.
The Israelites, caught up in the euphoria of their victory, failed to see the gravity of their disobedience. They had allowed their hearts to be swayed by greed and a desire for personal gain, forgetting the holiness and righteousness of the God they served.
Little did they know that their actions had pierced the heart of God, and the consequences of their disobedience would be far-reaching and devastating.
The seeds of rebellion, sown in the fertile ground of pride, were about to bear bitter fruit. God revealed Saul's disobedience to Samuel. Samuel was deeply grieved. He had anointed Saul, had seen God's hand upon him, and now he witnessed the king's tragic downfall. Early the next morning, Samuel set out to meet Saul.
What is the meaning of this?
The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God. but we totally destroyed the rest.
Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams.
Saul, confronted with the evidence of his sin, attempted to justify his actions. He offered excuses, claiming that he had acted out of a desire to honor God by offering sacrifices.
You disobeyed the Lord, and you did evil in his sight. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king.
Saul's heart sank. He had traded true obedience for empty rituals, valuing outward appearances over genuine submission to God's will. He had allowed pride to take root in his heart, and it had poisoned his relationship with God. The consequences of Saul's disobedience were swift and severe. God's spirit withdrew from him, leaving him vulnerable and afraid. The kingdom that he had fought so hard to build began to crumble around him. Saul, realizing the magnitude of his loss, pleaded with Samuel for forgiveness. He grasped at straws, desperate to regain the favor he had so carelessly thrown away. But it was too late. The die was cast. God had spoken, and his judgment was final.
Please forgive me.
Saul would remain king for a time, but the true power and anointing that he had once enjoyed were gone, replaced by fear, insecurity, and ultimately madness. The story of Saul stands as a sobering reminder that even those who start their journey with God's favor and blessing can fall from grace through disobedience. It highlights the importance of humility, the danger of pride, and the absolute necessity of unwavering obedience to God's commands. Saul's life, once filled with promise and potential, became a cautionary tale, a stark illustration of the truth that to disobey God is to forfeit his blessing and to invite his judgment. The story of Saul's rejection is not a story meant to discourage or condemn, but rather to inspire us to live lives of radical obedience to God. It reminds us that true worship is not found in empty rituals or outward appearances, but in a heart that is fully surrendered to God's will. Obedience, though it may be costly, is always worth the price. It is the pathway to true blessing, the key to unlocking God's favor, and the foundation upon which a life of purpose and significance is built. May we learn from Saul's mistakes, and may we strive to live lives that are marked by unwavering obedience, recognizing that to obey God is to truly love Him, and to love Him is to experience the fullness of His blessing and the richness of His presence in our lives.